y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and
oh my god. I can't get out. Oh my god.
The bustle dress being created out of jealousy and spite. Girl, the original BBL. Hello, and welcome back to the Madiswan channel. My name is Madison, and today we have our first installment of True Crime in Society for Black History Month. All these stories are going to revolve around Black people this month, so get used to it. But today we're going to be discussing the true crime story of Sarah Baartman. So get into that. Before we get into that story, of course, my name is Madison. This is the Madiswan channel. I do BIPOC true crime stories, sociological commentary on what's going on around us. And if that interests you, hit that subscribe button or hit that notification bell, comment, like the video, all of the things so it does better in the algorithm. And if you are returning, I love you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel. Comment down below, hit the like button, and all of y'all better watch all my ads, okay? Mwah. Oh, also, all my social media is in the description box below if you want to follow me, if you want updates. I'm very active on my YouTube community page. I like your opinions on things, so be sure to check that out if you want to know what's coming for the rest of the month. What else? I go live on TikTok a lot. Hit up my TikTok, girl. It won't hurt you. Yeah. Also, as you may see, I took the mic cap off of the microphone. I got a lot of complaints, or a couple, not a lot, about the sound in my last video. This is a new mic that I'm working with, so I'm trying to tried to kind of get mix up what I was doing with these little knobs to see if this video comes out better. To me, the other video came out fine. I just had to, obviously turn it up on my computer to listen to it. But the sound was clear. The sound was sharp. I just want to try and up the volume for you guys because I heard you. So I'm trying a new way. I think that mic cap, which was from my old mic, may not have worked with this mic and maybe was stifling a little bit of the sound. We shall see the difference. This is an experiment that you and I are both a part of, so comment down below about the mic, about the sound. I want to know y'all's opinion about it. Again, like in the last video, I'll be holding my mic because it felt really natural last time. It just felt fun. I felt like a reporter. I felt like Wendy Williams, who is iconic and who I love. So I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep me holding the mic and talking into the mic like this. I think it was fun, and I feel like I can sit more comfortably and be more casual with you guys. Before, I had to sit like this and have the mic coming in. And though I like the look of it or whatever, I just like this more. But anyway, let me know about the mic in the comments below. That being said, today we are going to be discussing the story of Sarah Baartman. Now, how do I start this? I have a BA in sociology from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Go Banana Slugs, of course. And in getting that BA, I had the opportunity, because once you pass your second year of college, you can get into higher level classes. And with sociology, it's a study of society. So you get history, anthropology, you have lots of different classes to choose from. It's not like computer science or biology where it's like science, you know what I mean? So I was able to kind of flirt around between different interdisciplinary places in school, and I took advantage of that because that's why I picked sociology, because it's a study of literally everything. And that degree fundamentally changed my brain chemistry, but we'll talk about that another day. But in the last year of my college experience, I got the opportunity to take a class called The History of Museums and the Politics of Display. Now, a bitch just took the class because I'm a museum kid. I grew up going to museums. My dad's an artist. My dad was growing up a freelance photographer as well as a teacher of photography at an art school local to us. And my mom is a museum girl. She loves art museums, history museums. Everywhere we travel, we would end up in a museum. I've seen Shakespeare's house. I've seen the Crown Jewels, baby. We were in a museum no matter what. And so I just was taking the class like, I love museums. Let's learn about the history of museums. But when I tell you, that class changed the way I look at museums, the way I look at display, the way I look at any kind of media that I'm meant to consume. It changed everything for me. It was a amazing class, and it wasn't at all what I expected it to be, but it was everything that I needed. And in this class, we had different, a section off by different units. And the first unit, we talked about kind of literally the history of museums, where the concept of a museum started, how it started, and what the different types of displays were, how to display things, and all sorts of things like that. Then we went into more political topics, like we talked a lot about freak shows, circuses, the displaying of the human, the displaying of the animals, different things like that, which I didn't expect out of the class, but that is where I learned about the story of Sarah Baartman. Now, some of you may have been blessed to have learned about it in high school or something like that. My high school wasn't giving that. It definitely wasn't giving that when it came to Black History Child. We'll talk about that at a different time. But it wasn't giving that. And what's unfortunate is the story of Sarah Baartman, much like the story of Bikini Atoll, which we did last week or a couple weeks ago at this point. It is so influential. Her story is so influential. She had her pulse and her finger in so many different influential things that forever changed European history, but we don't know anything about her. Just like Bikini Atoll was the catalyst for so many culturally relevant things that we still talk about to this day, but we never talk about the root and the reference. It's very much giving that. Sarah Baartman's story is a story about cultural appropriation. It is a story about exploitation. It is a story of the male gaze on the Black woman's body. It is a story about sexualization, fetishization, exoticization. Baby, that doesn't sound right, but you know what I'm saying. Orientalism. It is a story about colonialism. It is a story about all of the things combined. And when I finish telling the story, you will see what I mean when I say that Sarah Baartman's story is a blueprint for a lot of shit, a lot of historical shit. And we are going to talk about it today because it is, to me, once again, a true crime story. A disclaimer for the newbies here. When I say true crime story, I'm talking about more than your typical true crime story. There's historical context here. There's sociological, intersections here. We're talking about everything here. We're not just talking about so-and-so kidnapped so-and-so or they joined a cult. We talk about those stories here too, but in my little corner of the internet, we talk about deeper stuff. And that's why a lot of the stories I tell you as true crime stories through the context and the lens of true crime may or may not be publicly received as true crime stories. But I think this is one of those stories that I think we can all agree is horrific and is a true crime story in the more traditional sense. So that being said, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Sarah Baartman, her story, God, we'll get into all of it. One of the most important underlying themes of the story is colonialism and the concept of an expanding empire and the concept of othering and difference and all of those things in hierarchy, which we kind of start to really see take hold as slavery starts to really work its way into normality in our society back in the day. You know what I mean? There was a need to now racially rank people to justify what was going on with slavery, what was going on with colonialism, what was going on with all the exploitation going on. So, of course, the palm-colored people made something called pseudoscience. People call it pseudoscience, racist science, race science, which had no basis in reality. But race science was used as a reaction to slavery, as a reaction to this need to racially rank everybody in order to say who's the leader, who's the top person, which obviously was, what I mean. Race science involved measuring people's skulls or eye color, the measurement of your nose, and all of these things, and creating a whole fake science in order to prove that having a straighter nose, having straighter hair, having bluer eyes, having lighter skin meant that you were meant to rule the world. Point blank period. Not based in fact. They're measuring people's skulls, people's brains after they pass, seeing the divots in people's brains. So just nonsense, really. Just to prove, okay, if you're darker skinned, you are closer to an ape, or you're closer to an animal than you are, closer to being human. Which is so silly. But that is part of the conversation because, and we'll talk more about this when we discuss what a freak show is, what it meant to put humans on display, all of that later on in this video. But the reality is it's important for you to understand that that is a central theme to what happened to Sarah Baartman. That is a central theme to this story and a lot of other stories. As empire began to expand out into Africa, the Middle East, Asia, places that are cold, indigenous people from colder regions, Native Americans, as empire started to expand and European people started to come into contact with different type of people and how they look, we get this racial hierarchy shit, of course, but also we get this need to contextualize who they are versus who these people are. And here we go with the pseudoscience, the freak shows, and different things like that. So what we're seeing with Sarah Baartman's story is really a need to continuously prove that you are superior to somebody when in reality you're just a human like everybody else. Here's the thing. Nowadays, a freak show, and I'm just going to continue to call it a freak show because that is, what it's referred to as, but a freak show as entertainment would not typically be something that like you would do with your family. You take your kids to the circus on the weekends. Oh, the circus is in town isn't big news anymore. We're on social media. There's different ways to entertain ourselves at this point in time. But before all that, and leaking into modern times as well, the circus was a much bigger place, a much bigger stage than a lot of people give it credit for now. If you know the American Horror Story season freak show, which was arguably one of the best, you kind of have a slight sense of what it may have been like, what it can be like, definitely dramatized and stuff like that. And they didn't really talk about race that much, and it was set in the 50s, but you get what I mean. Like the circus coming into town, having land for however amount of time, they bring all their stuff and all their people and all of that kind of thing. Like that was a thing that people did on the weekends. That was entertainment. And as an extension of that, there was something called a freak show. And a freak show was attached to a circus, typically, and they would have people who were, disabled, maybe had some sort of physical deformity because of a health thing or because something happened, physically to their body. A lot of people often say the strong man or the woman with the beard or the elephant man is a big one that people talk about. Basically, a freak show was people who typically couldn't make a living in those times in any other way were kind of forced to exploit themselves or be exploited for display, for people to pay money to look at them, even touch them, and it wasn't an enjoyable experience. Let's just put it like that. People were not kind. So this is how they made money, but really they were making money for the people of the circus who owned the whole company of the circus, and what they were paying for was room and board and things of that nature. They were earning their keep. Much like Freak Show in American Horror Story. But like I'm saying, these were places, this was a phenomenon where people would go to be in awe, to see something that they wouldn't see in their normal suburban life in like buttfuck nowhere, Iowa or something, you know what I mean? And so there was lots of, little people, the strongman, the woman with a beard, all of these things, different things, like someone without a leg would be on Freak Show. And a lot of times they would create characters based on what was different about them. It was very ableist. Child, don't even get me started. It was very ableist. It was very messed up. It was very exploitative. But the people of the circus would create backstories for these people. So, the woman with a beard, like, drink a concoction and da-da-da-da-da, and her story is this like larger than life story, and people would go to hear the story. So someone would tell the story, and then you could walk around and watch her display herself. Maybe she'd have a little act, a little talent, and people would pay their money and go. A lot of times people would yell harsh things, people would be violent, people would throw things, people would sneer. It was not enjoyable, to say the least, to perform in these situations, because you were being displayed in front of this crowd as a curiosity, as something that is not normal. No one was trying to contextualize you and normalize your existence. They are trying to decontextualize you and make everyone look at you and point out the one thing that makes you different than other people, typically. You know what I'm saying? So, not really big now, but huge back then, because people didn't really have much to do. And this is where Sarah Baartman's story kind of begins. So understand the idea of fetishization, exotification, othering, Orientalism, colonialism within the context of freak shows and all of that during this particular time. It's very, very important. Very important. Before we really get into the meat and potatoes of it, I just want to let it be known about this. This is why my class was called The History of Museums and the Politics of Display. Because everything you're consuming is political. And you have to learn that quick when you're studying a social science. You have to learn that quick in the field of sociology, but many people don't think of the world in that way. Anything that is up for grabs for you to be consuming has a political tinge to it. That's why I never understand why people are like, well, talking about politics isn't polite, and politics is like, let's not talk about, I can ignore your politics. I can ignore Mima's politics just so we can have a Thanksgiving dinner. No. Everything about how you exist, what you buy, what you watch, where you go to have fun, what you do is political. So the freak show, particularly at this time where there's an intersection between trying to create racial hierarchy while also having this form of very exploitative entertainment, who do you think got the brunt of that? Let's be real. Where the circus actually became a political place, right? What the greater society was trying to convey to the average human was being conveyed in the microcosm of the freak show without most people understanding. And, we'll get more into that. Sarah Baartman's story starts and ends with her physical body, with her physicality. So keep that in mind. She was a descendant of the Kukkehu people, Kukehu people, I believe that's how you say it, who were the first indigenous people of South Africa, specifically the Cape. And during her lifetime, obviously, South Africa was being controlled by the Dutch, and her people were not enslaved technically, but they were basically pretty much decimated because of the disease that the Dutch brought over. So, very tumultuous time in this time period. She comes from the original people of this particular area in South Africa. Sarah Baartman was part of a generation, part of a time of indigenous people, a wave of indigenous people who were being pushed into the cities to find work because of what was going on with, the land grabbing, the diseases, people dying out, and all of that. So in order to survive, she was pushed into going into urban areas to find work, and obviously this work naturally had to do with working for a Dutch person, working for a European person. So at 20 years old, Sarah is building her life in Cape Town. She's getting domestic work, which obviously we know, and she's working for a Dutch farmer. At this particular political time, though, this is when the Dutch control of this area was being handed over to the British. So she's seeing a lot of transitions happening. She herself is part of a transitional period in working in Cape Town in general. And of course, this was exploitation. She wasn't making the big bucks. She wasn't, she was a step above a slave. Barely, you know what I'm saying? So she's working for a Dutch family. She's seeing this political change of hands, and she's kind of, happy that the Dutch are relinquishing control of the area, because at this point, Britain was kind of in talks about abolishing slavery and all of that. The abolishing slavery conversation was huge, and so she was hoping that this transition would mean she'd have a better life here in South Africa. So before she could really see that political change happen, her physical body was getting a lot of attention from the European men in town. Now, Sarah was under 5 feet tall, so shorter than me. I'm 5'1", and extremely, extremely curvaceous. Now, as us Black women know, the non-watered down version of us, meaning the people directly from the continent itself, body shapes out of this world. Just curvaceous, luscious beauty. So Sarah's body, in context to her growing up in South Africa and being African, was not out of the norm. It was a normal body type because, that it just was normal. But to the European male gaze, it was a curiosity. It was exotic. It was a lot of things. They'd never seen a body like hers. Her body was very curvaceous for being so short. So she was getting a lot of attention based on her physical appearance. And one of the European men that she caught the attention of was a man named Alexander Dunlop, who, of course, is one of the men who changed her life forever. Now, Alexander, I believe, was a medical professional. Let me double check that. Yes. So Alexander Dunlop was a medical professional, a doctor specifically, who had a side hustle of catching wild animals and selling them to people in Britain. He was like a wild animal black market person on the side of being a doctor to get extra money. And he saw Sarah and immediately saw dollar signs. He saw an opportunity. He was already picturing the plan. So he was the one that was basically the architect of what ended up happening to Sarah. He knew, though, that he couldn't approach Sarah in this way. He couldn't approach her and tell her to, like the same way he would get a wild animal and sell it to Britain people. He couldn't do it that way. He had to strategically think of his approach, which is where annoying man number 2 comes in, to kind of soften the blow and facilitate this exchange happening. So man number 2, annoying man number 2, his name is Hendrik Salzar, and he was a freed black man. that was local to the community. He either was a descendant of freed people or he himself was freed. It's unclear. But Alexander had basically approached Hendrik and was like, yo, we can make a bag if we get that girl to Europe and have her be put on display. Do you hear the money talking? And it didn't take much to convince Hendrik, about the money, and basically he was the one that started facilitating the conversation with Sarah, approached Sarah, and brought her to be convinced to, eventually be put on display. Now, what I will say is, if we want to get deep into this conversation, there's a lot of different relationships and communities being represented in this story. And for some people who don't understand that there isn't just interracial issues, there are intra-racial issues. And in my community, some of those issues, some of the most vicious fights happen between Black men and Black women. And in this case, I think a lot of the critique that Black women have for Black men, even to this day, is that they are not invested in the liberation of all of our people. Queer people, people on the LGBTQIA spectrum included. They are specifically in it for their personal gain, right? Hold on. There was a conversation recently discussing W.E.B. Du Bois, who is arguably one of the most quoted, one of the most recognizable, abolitionists and activists of our history in America. But there is this conversation going around about how, when Black women in our community gain wealth or gain knowledge that's important to our liberation, we share it. But when Black men do it, gain wealth, gain knowledge that's important, they hoard it. W.E.B. Du Bois came up as an example because he learned how to read and never taught his wife, who desperately wanted to know how to read, how to read. And that was just one example of many. You know what I'm saying? And so when I see the situation with Hendrik, who's obviously a freed person, so I don't know if he was freed or he came from people who were freed. Either way, his existence in Cape Town was not the same as Sarah's. But there is this conversation amongst Black men and Black women in our racialized, community, where we critique them for wanting to be more like white men and less about true equalization and true liberation. Because if they were about it, they would be about it. But a lot of times they just want to be about it until they get into spaces that they were previously not allowed to be in. And I think this is just the perfect example of that. He convinces this woman because he sees a trip to Europe, he sees dollar signs, he sees an ability to move on and up maybe in his life with his attachment to exploiting this Black woman. And he doesn't see her as somebody to cherish or take care of or discourage this man from going after her or anything of that nature. He sees himself, he sees what she can do for him, and that's basically how the story begins. So for some people, to the untrained eye, people may say like, oh, well, why did she even agree to go with them? Why did she even agree to go with them? I think we have to exercise more empathy in our day-to-day lives, but think about that. What would make you leave something that you know behind to go to the unknown, to a whole nother nation in the hopes of something? What would make you leave it behind? To me, what was clear is that her life in South Africa was very difficult. There was lots of racialized violence. She was not living well in South Africa. And like I said, she had hopes for when the Dutch delivered South Africa to the British, because the British were already talking about abolishing slavery and things of that nature. So she, in her mind, was like, okay, well, if I go to this source, though, maybe it will be a better life for me. And mind you, there are two men who are influential, whispering sweet nothings in her ear, convincing her, if you do this, we will make a lot of money, you'll be rich in Europe, you'll be able to do this, you'll be able to send money back, you'll be able to come back. And so, of course, she was easily swayed and easily convinced of this reality, right? So our good old girl, Sarah, agrees after Hendrix and eventually Alexander, if you will, convince her that this is the move to go, this is her future, she's going to make a lot of money, and it's temporary. So she decides to go to Europe and allows them to put her on display. So somehow a deal was struck between the three of them, and what basically the rough facts of the deal that was struck was that Sarah was to go with them to London. She was going to be put on display for 5 years. She was going to make her money and move back to South Africa and all of this. Let some other people tell the story. They may say things like, oh, she just wanted to go to Europe and stuff like that. She had some sort of bargaining chip in her favor. The reality is she was completely bamboozled and lied to about what was going to be on the other side of the ocean. She had no idea what she was going to be experiencing. She had no idea what her show was going to be about. She was not told this above board. She was just convinced to get on the boat, and they would say anything to get her on the boat. But once she left her home, she was vulnerable, she was isolated, she was alone, and it was dependent fully on these men for everything. So, of course, it didn't end up going the way that they said it would go. And, of course, they were liars. It's not hard to think. Unfortunately, the true reality of her situation began to set in once she got to Europe, immediately when she got there, and she quickly realized that she would probably never see South Africa ever again in her life, and she was right, she never did. They completely stripped her of her identity, changed who she was. Her stage name was the Hottentot Venus, and she became almost an instant sensation. She was instantly popular. People would come from far and wide to see her, all because of her body, of course, and she was a hit immediately in London. Now, I want you to sit here and think about what it would be like to be Sarah in this situation, right? You leave home under false pretenses. You learn that soon after, but there's no going back. You're in a strange country. You may or may not be familiar with a little bit of the language, but not a lot. And you're completely dependent on these two men for everything. Food, clothing, shelter, all of this stuff. And you're forced to trust them because you have no other options. So imagine this scene. Someone pays a couple shillings to go into a tent and is transported into a different time, a savage time, as they might have talked about it. You see a woman dressed in flesh-colored, tight clothing to simulate nudity, covered in different beads, different colorful beads to, again, simulate nudity. And you see all of the curves of her body, which are completely different and completely alien to you because you've never seen anything like it before. Now, she's likely on stage with someone called her handler. This person would be Hendrik Salazar. And he would be talking about who she was, talking about her story. Like I said, a lot of these stories were fabricated for interest of the audience. And you could pay to view her, or you could pay extra money to touch her or poke her with a stick. So this is her reality now, okay? Think about that. Think about how triggering, how traumatizing this reality is. On top of that, this man who is your handler, who on paper should be advocating for you and supporting you and helping you or whatever is fully taking advantage of you. He beats you. He's very violent to you on stage. You are getting jeers, sneers, things thrown at you. People are poking you all over with sticks. People are paying extra money to put their hands on you. And that is something that everyone would say that she hated the most, was these men putting their hands on her and touching her and being poked with this stick. This is her reality now. This is her reality. And it's one of those things where, you know, how could she have known? Because she trusted these people. She was manipulated by these people. She didn't know that it was going to be like this. But you have to understand that for her to be yearning to go back to be essentially being a glorified slave in South Africa, instead of doing this, you know it was hell. You already know it was hell. So, of course, it wasn't just her body being put on display. Her show was billed as more of a scientific discovery, right? Think of it as like they basically were billing her and advertising the show as, we found the eighth wonder of the world. We found the link between humans and apes. This person, this woman, is a scientific link between savages and humans, and we found her, and that's how she was billed. So it was a lot of people coming in with this scientific gaze. Obviously there's lots of sexualization and fetishization attached to that, but it was a lot of it was billed as, we found the eighth wonder of the world, and it is this Hottentot Venus. It is this woman. And the reality was, she was just an African woman with an African woman's body type, who was curvaceous, who was seen by the wrong person on the wrong day and manipulated into a situation she couldn't get herself out of. Point blank, period. But to bill her as the eighth wonder of the world and the missing link, it's just crazy. And I just want to go on a quick rant, because that is how... Okay, like I said, freak shows were the home of people with deformities, whether it was a birth, something that came from birth, something that happened later in life, illnesses, weird curiosities, like I said, deformities, disabilities, things of that nature. And then on top of that, the extension of that were people like Sarah, who really there was nothing wrong or anything with her. She just was an African woman with an African body. But the reality, and you have to follow me on that, what freak shows, the cornerstone of freak shows is to decontextualize an individual. So in Africa, in Cape Town, there probably was 10 women walking down the street who looked just like Sarah, had her body type. And to these European people, men in particular, they were probably breaking their necks to look at these women. But to the people who grew up with these women, who live with these women, who have mothers that look like her, it was nothing to wag your tail about. She was just a normal African woman in South Africa. And they decontextualized that and then put it in a place that it wasn't normal for someone to have the body shape. It wasn't normal for these people to really interact with someone straight from the African continent. So you can make a story and point out about all the differences about how Sarah looked versus the average white European woman. And now she's a curiosity. Now she's a freak. When in reality, you're putting all of these people under this exploitative umbrella in order to point out their differences in society and act like they are on the outskirts, on the fringe of society. They're literally saying she's the missing link, she's the eighth wonder of the fucking world, when she's just a South African woman, period, full stop. They did this to Native Americans, they did this to indigenous people, like, you know, Inuit people and things of that nature. They did this to Asian people, they did this to Latinx people, they did this to all sorts of different types of people, different groups of indigenous people of color, and they recontextualize them as something to gawk at, as a freak in a freak show, when in reality they're just from a different place in the planet with different phenotypes. So this is what I mean when I say the freak show becomes political, because by doing this action right? And umbrelling all of these people, because to be frank, it's like, I'm not trying to be shady. The reality is the Elephant Man is different than just an African woman existing, but they lump these two things together. Now, is it right for them to also exploit the Elephant Man and call him a freak? No, he's somebody who has some sort of health thing that is different, that is less common to see in day-to-day life. But to put that in the same category as existing as a Black, Asian, Latin person of Latin descent person is just wrong. Because what you're doing is you're conflating these two identities. Like, this isn't supposed to happen, quote unquote, like this man has some sort of disease that makes him the Elephant Man, and that's the same thing as being Black, being Latinx, being Asian. That is the same thing to European people. So when you start to think about this in that way, and you realize that the freak show is a political arena where they're really trying to propagandize the average white European person to think like this, you start to see how that shows up in our day-to-day life in modern times. Why it's totally understandable or totally normalized that a cop would shoot an unarmed Black guy, because it goes back to this kind of propaganda. You're not really a person. You're closer to an animal, and we have to put you down. And you start to see how even these same sentiments as this get played out in the media we consume, in the news you watch, in the social media follows you social media follow. You get to see that. And I just want to hammer that point home, because to be billed as the eighth wonder of the world, but actually you're just someone who was kidnapped from where you live, and it's just like, you gotta be fucking serious. Like, let's be serious for 1 second. So, of course, this is hell. Her existence is hell on earth for this poor woman. She's yearning for home. She's being touched by strangers every night. And mind you, she's making these two men very rich. And I'm sure Alexander Dunlap was making a lot more money off of her than Salazar was, her handler. But they were making a ton of money. And she had to live in this place where, she was being beaten. She was being fed scraps. She was being treated terribly. But she had nowhere to go. No shelter. No money, no nothing of her own. So she had to stay with her abusers in order to actually not sleep outside or have a place to stay. So this was her life, on and off, being on display. Of course, she became widely popular, and the introduction of her show in Europe actually started the wave of bringing Aboriginal people from Australia and bringing Native American people and bringing Asian people into Europe and putting them on display in freak shows. She led the charge. Her show was cutting edge at the time and widely popular. So her existence was then an inspiration for other similarly minded exploitative white people, white Europeans, to go to these places or buy these people from other people who went to these places and kidnapped these people, and widen the market for racialized freak shows. And this is what happened, of course. And I just want to say what I learned in my class, which was an amazing class, and I will never stop speaking its praises. This was common in like the 19th century, obviously, and they would do this at the World's Fair.
For this former attraction is ethnological exposition. They were public displays of people, typically from colonial territories of the host nation. They would be kept in villages that were based off of their homeland, and information about the people featured in the exposition would be placed on the outside of their village enclosure. Throughout their existence, such exhibitions garnered controversy over their demeaning, derogatory, and dehumanizing nature. They began as part of circuses, or freak shows, which displayed exotic humans in a manner akin to a caricature, which exaggerated their differences. Over time, human zoos developed into independent displays, emphasizing the exhibit's inferiority to Western culture, and in the information provided about the human zoo or village enclosure, there would be cultural and scientific information that would bolster or support the justification for its inhabitants' subjugation by the host nation.
World's Fair isn't something that happens anymore, but it was massive in this time into like the 40s and 50s. I think my dad went to a World's Fair. He was born in the 60s, so it was going on for a while. But the World's Fair was something where they would pick a place, and they would have all of these vendors, all of these different things, museums, sites to see, all of this stuff. And all of these people from all over the world would come and descend on this place and, go to the fair. And at these fairs, they'd have people living in huts or whatever, people who are meant to be seen as savage or whatever, lower on the totem pole of human, and they'd have these freak shows, these racialized freak shows. You could get, postcards with their pictures on it and stuff like that. Like, this wasn't something that was isolated in a very particular time. This continued and also was underscored and continued at World's Fairs all over the United States, all over Europe, all over the place. So just so you know, this isn't just like, oh, a circus thing. It was a thing that was like a national thing. It was something that was hugely, hugely popular. So yeah. Now here's something that gagged me when I first heard about Sarah's story. Sorry, I'm trying to get comfortable. Okay. Here's something that gagged me about Sarah's story and why her story reminds me of the story of Bikini Atoll in terms of just cultural impact. She single-handedly forced the hand of European women's fashion designers to create the bustle dress. And if you don't know what the bustle dress is, I'll put a picture up here. But it's that classic European dress shape where obviously the woman's corseted and then she has extra fabric on her, above her butt area to make it kind of this weird kind of shape like this. And then there's the dress, obviously, and it's like this fabric that's put here. It's also a technique when you're sewing, bustling stuff, but it extends this area to make it more round and voluminous so that you kind of are mimicking the body shape, the body type of Sarah. The reason why Sarah is the inspiration for this is because her show was widely popular and widely attended by European men. And European women, of course, there's so many lessons in the story, but it's like this story, Sarah's story is like the real Black woman experience, child. We just minding our business and people be obsessed over us, good and bad, child. We be inspiring shit. We be on the cutting edge of stuff. We be historical events all up within a human body just existing. And people just have so many opinions about us. Well, we're just like, can we go back to where we want to go now? Can we do what we want to do without scrutiny? Like, we're not asking for too much. But anyway, in Sarah's case, her shows were widely attended by European men, and they were very fixated sexually, obviously, to her body and to her shape. And men were fetishizing her. They were obsessed over her. They would go to these shows all the time to see her naked body. And their white women counterparts didn't see or didn't relate to another woman being forced to be in the nude in front of a bunch of men, and how exploitative that is, and how that woman may feel, and does she even want to do this? Does she have a personality of her own? Does she have a voice of her own? Is this something that she's consenting to? That's not where their mind went. Their mind went to competition. It went to jealousy, of course. And so instead of looking at that and advocating maybe as another woman on behalf of a woman and seeing if this is something she really wanted to do, no, they were mad, they were jealous, and they created an entire category of dress to try and imitate this woman's body shape that she was born with. An entire category of European fashion fundamentally changed by this African woman just being shapely. So this story is gaggy. Not only was she the cutting edge of putting people on display racially in the first place, but she inspired the bustle dress, and nobody talks about this woman. Be so serious. be so serious. Black women never get the credit, but are forever influential, child. It's her story. Like, when I was like researching for this, because I obviously knew her story from the class, but that was like, I don't know, 2017. So it was like refreshing in writing the script, and I was like, damn. If this is not my life, but, you know, obviously not to this scale, but if this is not the existence of being a Black woman in America, and if you can sympathize with Sarah's story, you can sympathize with your fellow Black woman and understand that this is what it's like to exist here. This is what it's like. You're put on display wherever you go. You're a topic of conversation. Your body is a political landmine. You are revolutionary. You are beautiful. You are smart. You are everything. You are cutting edge. You are changing the culture. You are inspiring people. People are opinionated about you when you are just existing. Honey, it's like not the bustle dress being created out of jealousy and spite. Girl, the original BBL. So this is where things kind of take a little bit of a turn. So in 1810, this man attended one of Sarah's shows. His name was Zachary McCollin. Let me see. McCollin. He attended one of her shows. He was a journalist, and he basically writes a scathing review on the show and how it disgusted him, not because of Sarah, but because of the blatant exploitation. And of course, this is still happening in London, who at this point in time had abolished slavery a few years before this. So he was basically using Sarah's show basically to indict an entire country about how you claim that you abolished slavery, which they didn't really abolish slavery. They still allowed slavery in their colonies, so let's not pretend that they are better than America. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. But he wrote this scathing article that was basically like, you are abolishing slavery and getting clout off that when, bitch, this is a slave show. This is a slave clown show. And so it got a lot of attention, and Sarah became a political figure who, again, being put into the mix without even wanting to be, really. She became a political figure about exploitation, slavery in Europe. He basically goes to the Attorney General and demands on Sarah's behalf that they investigate her situation, whether this is exploitation, whether this was consented, whether she had any agency in this relationship. So that is what was done. And she had like this big public ass trial, and she became a figurehead for the abolitionist movement in Europe, which is just like, of course. And little does she know, you know what I mean? This woman is being exploited day and night by the men that brought her here, by the men that come to her shows. And this woman is just tired. She wants to go home. She wants to go to South Africa again. She's trying to fulfill this 5-year contract. And this woman single-handedly creates the bustle dress, single-handedly changes how freak shows are done racially, single-handedly becomes the face of the abolitionist movement just by living her life. Ciao. Okay, anyway. So Sarah becomes this polarizing political figure. She becomes this like lightning rod of activating the abolitionist movement in Europe, specifically Britain, and her case is like widely covered and widely talked about. Now, the case itself, we'll talk about it. So basically, the court case is widely not televised. What am I talking about, baby? There was no TV. The court case was widely covered. And basically, the court case, the linchpin of the court case was basically trying to suss out whether or not Sarah was here on her own free will, whether this relationship she had with her two handlers was a slave relationship or was actually a active working relationship where she contributed to it as well and was enjoying it. That was a court case. And basically for the court case, she was her name was not put on the court case at all. It was only like England against what's his name, Hendrik Salazar and Alexander Dunlop. Her name wasn't even a part of the case, which is like, of course, erasure. But anyway, her name wasn't even a part of the case. But basically, they interview her for the case in Dutch, and they're basically asking her like, Did you come here on your own free will? Where are you from? Did you, is this consenting? Did you want this? Trying to suss out the information. And basically, out of that interview, she basically says, yes, I wanted this. Yes, I wanted this. I'm consenting. But the crux of that is in that interview, Hendrik Salazar and freaking Alexander Dunlap are in the room. So, of course, knowing that she has to go home with these two men who are abusing her and exploiting her, do you think she's going to sit there and say, this is the worst decision I've ever made. I want to go back to South Africa. They're exploiting me. I'm a slave. She's not going to say that. This is all she knows now. This is her life now. She's in a strange land, in a strange country with these two men who are the only two men that she knows who are giving her shelter and food and work or whatever. And so they're in this room with her. She doesn't have the privacy, the ability to speak on her own. And so she lies and says, oh, this is totally fine. And of course, what's his name? Alexander Dunlap uses this opportunity to then produce to the people doing this interview, the lawyers doing this interview, a contract that Sarah signed, which came into hot debate, and we'll get into that, controversy a little bit, that basically was like, yeah, this is her even extending her contract to stay here. So I don't know what you're talking about, because why would she sign this if she didn't really want to do it, clearly? And that was the end of the case. Basically, they bullied her and intimidated her into not telling the truth, and then presented what a lot of people believe to be a forged contract, of course, because if it was really done in good faith, she would have had a signed contract back in South Africa in Cape Town. But of course, this was a forged contract after she was in Europe and had nothing, no way of escaping. She was forced into signing it one way or another, whether that be just for self-preservation or to stop her being abused. You know what I mean? And so it's not accurate. It's not real. But that the case ended, and basically they concluded, oh, she's in on the exploitation. She's in on the act, so it's not exploitation, when it actually obviously was, of course. So basically, after all of this hoopla and all of this media attention because of this court case, they decide to take Sarah to France to be displayed. So leaving London, going to France. She ends up going there, and Alexander Dunlap basically decides, I'm just going to sell you to an animal trainer, because obviously I can buy and sell you, meaning this is a slave interaction, and they sell her to an animal wrangler or whatever. She's obviously put on display in Europe, but she's also there's a lot of evidence to say that in France is where things took a turn towards the prostitution side. So she was exploited, became a sex slave in a lot of ways in France, and was prostituting or forced into prostitution by her new handler in France. So then, after being in France for a short while, on a very cold day in 1815, she dies penniless and alone in France at 26 years old. She died at 26. And unfortunately, though, you would think that's the end of the story and that's the end of her exploitation. Maybe she's in a happier place now. They couldn't even let her body rest in peace, baby. They couldn't even let that body rest in peace, baby, because the exploitation continued. Let's keep getting into this story, okay? So, hours after she passes away, the prestigious doctor George Cuvier in France was given the special permission to take her body and dissect her body. Of course. This isn't a human person that deserves to be buried with her family in South Africa. We don't have to do right by her because we didn't do right by her while she was living. So yeah, of course, I'm going to then sell her a third time to this doctor, this prestigious anatomy scientist in France, to then experiment on her dead body so she can't even rest in peace. She is still a product of, she is still something to be consumed. She is still not human. She's an object to be used. So he doesn't dissect her to get an autopsy. It is widely thought that she died of pneumonia. No. He dissects her to look at her bones, to look at the inside of her body, and to basically look at her genitals in a feat to create more fictions about racialized science and why Black people are closer to this and closer to that. You see what I'm saying? He was trying to prove, what his thesis was trying to prove was that every different race of human was actually a different species. So we weren't all human, we were different species. And he was doing that by looking at her brain and measuring her brain, looking at her genitals and measuring her genitals, and all of that, again, going back to my first rant of this video, the undercurring theme of all of this, which was the making a hierarchy of race. So she was cut up, looked at, all in the name of proving the fake reality that white men were superior. Of course. When all was said and done, he basically concludes that her small ears and small eyes mean that she's directly related to an orangutan. Said that she had the quickness of a monkey, and you could tell that by, I don't know, her bones or the divots in her brain. Girl, the phenotype, let's just move on from that, even though it's hard to. He basically cuts her body up, calls her a monkey, and that's the conclusion of the whole thing. And then basically, you'd think, okay, he finished his thing, he cut her up, he's gonna sew her back together, do right by her, send her body back home, bury her at least, just let her rest. Of course not. Of course not. The story gets worse. He then preserves specific parts of her body, her genitals being one of them, and her bones and different body parts of her. He preserves them and then makes a full body cast of her, and only to be sold for the fourth time to a museum to be put on display for many, many years. For many years. Her genitals were on display in a museum for many years. Her bones. This woman could not catch a break. She was sold originally, brought to Europe, and she was sold 3 other times. She couldn't be buried. They put her body, her genitals, in a museum for years. To the point, let's talk about this, because this is a really big point that I want to hammer home. Her body was on display in these museums until the 1990s, when Nelson Mandela became president and pushed for her remains to be brought back to South Africa. She was recently brought back, like in my lifetime brought back. Her body had been in Europe, her genitals, all of that had been in museums on display for that long. Sick, twisted behavior. Like, what? And here's the linchpin of that. Even as she sold to the museum for the last time and her body was put on display yet again, they put her body with its back turned towards the people. So her being in display, her face was turned towards a wall. So the only thing that was being put on display was her body, yet again, reduced to her body. Again, the story starts and ends with this woman's body, of course, and that's how they displayed her. So before we even go away, I just want to say, that point in particular makes my skin crawl, especially after the class that I will never stop shouting out, History of Museums and Politics of Display. But what are the politics attached with displaying a black woman like that? After this story, after you hear her life story, what are the politics of that? What is the politics of that? Answer below. Now, I'm going to say allegedly, child, but I would not put it past these people, put it past these men that she was sold to 4 times over in Europe. I would not put it past her. But there are also rumors that when she was freshly deceased, wealthy men were able to pay money for a certain amount of time to have sex with her corpse. Allegedly, child, but I believe it to be true. And so I just wanted to add that in there to let you know that it got even worse. Child. That's how her story ends. Thankfully, Nelson Mandela pushed for her remains to come back to South Africa in the 90s, and she's buried there in South Africa with a memorial stone that you can visit. Obviously, that's a place where people go and visit a lot. Yeah. In conclusion, because, it's hard to end a story on that note, but in conclusion, I just want to say a couple things. As a Black woman, Sarah is us, we are Sarah. Our story is Sarah's story. Maybe not as severe, but the sentiments remain. We are treated the same. Though we have the same impact, we are treated as disposable. We are treated as objects in the very same way. We are fetishized for how we look naturally. We are fetishized for our body. We are fetishized. People have so many opinions and place them on us. Our bodies are a political hellscape war ground with minds. It's a minefield. Our bodies, as a Black person, as a Black woman existing, me standing up and going outside is political because of these racialized hierarchies that were created by some random loser white guy years ago to justify eating slaves and making them do all the work by not paying them. I want to be beamed up by the aliens sooner than later. And this is how that story makes me feel, because it is very emotional and it's very sad and it's just a lot to take in. So I guess that being said, and unfortunately ending on that note, what I will say is justice for Sarah. Say her name. Read her story, sing her praises, never forget who she is, never forget what she was, who she was, never forget her cultural impact. And if you get a chance to visit her in South Africa, pay your respects, because child, she went through the ringer and she didn't deserve any of it. That being said, all I have to say is, if you like the video, there's so much more content for you to catch up on if you're new. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, make sure to comment. The YouTube algorithm is being a little funky, but that's cool. We're going to power through it. And, make sure to subscribe and join the family. Like I said, my socials are in the description. I'm very active on TikTok. That's where you get more of a preview of what I'll be talking about. I'm trying to get more active on my YouTube shorts, but that's a conversation for another day. I also did my very first live of my series called YouTube Tips for a Lazy Bitch, where I give you YouTube tips from my first year on YouTube, behind the scenes of what I learned and all of these things, YouTube tips that I would want myself to know a year ago. So I go live the last week of every month on Thursday evenings. Typically, I had to do Wednesday because I had something to do this Thursday, but I go live so you can watch the replay. It's in my live tab when you go to my channel page, so check that out. That's a new addition. And next week we're going to be doing a doc talk, but we are actually going to be switching it up and talking about the age-old question: is the Zeus network bad for the Black community? If you want to hear my breakdown about that, sociologically, of course, come back next week. That is what we're going to be talking about. I love you guys so, so, so much. If you are returning, thank you for support. Thank you for everything. Share this video, comment, like. I hope you all watched all my ads, and I'm being serious. Support a Black woman after a story like that, please. Power to the people. Happy Black History Month. And without further ado, all I have to say is Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards. I love you very much. Goodbye.